Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
We're a Commander podcast and casual 60 podcast. What am I saying? We're a podcast that talks about Magic at the casual level. That's what we are. As you can tell by the anxious stutter in my voice, we're casual, I swear. How's it going, Bruce?
It's going well. How about you?
It is going. Gave notice at my job today.
Boom.
Moving to LA.
By the time this podcast is released, will you be in law?
Almost definitely.
You heard it, folks.
If you see me on the streets, give me a wave.
You're gonna have to talk for them to recognize you. So if you see some guy walking down the street going, hello, then you're going to know.
It might be me. It might be, honestly, somebody else. So today, we've been reflecting on, the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic has started. I mean, so much has happened. We started a podcast.
We did.
Other things have happened. There's been, let's see, all the way since Ikoria, I think.
Yeah.
So there's been, 8 or 9 sets at least?
I did the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 sets, if you include...
9 standard sets.
If you include Core Set 2021, yes, 9 sets. And that doesn't even include Modern Horizons 2 or the recent Commander Legends.
Or... unsanctioned, or
does not
any
include
of
unsanctioned.
Or any of the tertiary. We're generally counting the commander decks that come out alongside sets as the same set. So we've been hanging out, thinking about all these things, and we're like, you know what? We've been buying a lot less product since the beginning of the pandemic than we realized, and we figured we'd look at some cards that either we missed or we think you might have missed. And this will be a recurring thing, I'm sure.
Oh yes,
but
yeah, we had it in our head. I mean, if two guys who are doing a Magic podcast are seeing,
that's us.
Yes, are going through and seeing the sets come by so fast and furious, especially through the pandemic. We had a sneaking suspicion that our audience maybe was missing a few of these cards as well. So we thought we would take the opportunity, sort of cards that COVID forgot, or COVID made us forget.
Or COVID. I don't want to say COVID staples because that sounds bad, but cards that I feel like would fit more of a more general decks than the niche ones we do with like Temple's Treasures.
Right.
And I think in general, I mean, like, even so much as, like, sure, you may be one of our listeners that does keep up on sets from set to set, and like, oh, like, I look at all the previews and all these things, but like, you're either going to be the type to not do that and miss cards, or you're currently overwhelmed with the amount of cards that we've had since Ikoria, which has been about, 3,500. I think it's been like 3,500 first printings of cards since Ikoria came out.
Right. So, by the way,
it's crazy.
And Andy, in case you were wondering, you said COVID staples, so I immediately searched for any Magic card with the word mask in it, because I'm going for the low hanging fruit laugh. Turns out most masks in Magic don't cover your mouth. They cover like the top half of your face, like Batman.
Or, like with Estrid, they float about 6 inches away from your face.
Well, there's that. Let's just say the Mask of Griselbrand is not going to protect you from any sort of airborne disease.
I don't know. It gives you flying. You can fly away. I'll start things off. I've talked about this card a handful of times.
Real quick.
I don't think as...
Andy, before we get too far in, we should mention that so for today's episode, we're going to cover cards from Ikoria proper and from Commander 20, Commander 2020, which is the Ikoria, essentially the Ikoria commanders. So I didn't think we covered that early on. So,
which I think for Ikoria there were 4? I think.
I believe.
No, there must have been 5.
Were there 5?
I feel like there had to have been 5, if only because it was 3-color decks.
Then it would make sense there would be 5.
But I don't know.
I can't remember.
These commander decks, for those slightly aware, are the ones that gave us the free spells, like Deflecting SWAT and whatever the blue one is, where it's like, oh, if you have your commander, you don't have to pay for this. Cool. Anyway, so 5. Okay, there are 5. Great. Ikoria brought a lot of things to Magic, and unfortunately came at the worst possible time, as we all started to be less together, especially in game stores, which made it fairly difficult to get a grasp on 2 things. 1, ability counters, which I think picked up pretty quickly, and 2, mutate, which I wish didn't have this pandemic thing going on, because I think it's a really cool mechanic, and I don't know if they're gonna revisit it anytime soon.
Yeah, and I mean, as somebody who has a silver bordered deck that involves mashing 2 creatures together, I gotta think this was kind of the set for me. And I really didn't jump on the bandwagon the way I would have had I not been, stuck at home by myself with no actual way to play Magic other than using Zoom, which was something that was still brand new to me at the time. And
it's still less preferred than in person, but so I guess with all that said, let's get into the cards.
Sure.
First one I've talked about probably a handful of times. I wish I talked about it more. Luminous Broodmoth. It's 2 white for a 3/4 flying insect. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So essentially it revives your creatures instantly if they don't fly, and comes back, gives it a flying counter. If you have a way to remove that flying counter, when it dies again, it'll come back with a flying counter. I love this card. Does not generally give itself that recursion, but if you give it Colossus Hammer, it loses flying. And then it will bring itself back to life.
Yes, that's the hard way.
Yeah. What I like most about this is that not only are you getting your creature back instantly, so it's harder for your opponent to get rid of things fully. It comes back flying, so now it has evasion. Which is fantastic, because we need more flying all the time. Especially if these creatures didn't have flying to begin with. You get ETB triggers, you get leaves the battlefield triggers, you get Sir Conrad triggers of it going into the graveyard and then out of the graveyard. It's great.
It is great. Couple of interesting things with the Broodmoth. Speaking of merged creatures, if a merged creature dies and it doesn't have flying, then both parts of them, all the parts of the merged creature return to the battlefield, and they each get a flying counter.
Whoa.
Yeah. So you may not get your massive behemoth merged massive creature, but you will get several creatures that all have flying counters on them. I like this
also,
even just for the recursion alone. And I realize that this is a one-time recursion, but you can really set it up to be for there to be just a mass removal spell, and all your stuff comes back with flying, yes,
Yeah.
you'll lose the brood moth, but
Right.
I mean,
That's the great thing about this card is that like if like faced a board wipe, you get everything that doesn't fly back.
yeah,
And unfortunately not the moth, but like it is protection to an extent.
right. But all this stuff comes back with flying, so
Yeah.
it's not even a case of everything. You're getting it back, and a lot of times what happens when you when you use mass removal is you're recovering at the same rate as all of your opponents. Mm-hmm. So you're not really getting anywhere. You're pulling yourself out of an ugly situation, and then you're hoping that you'll get parity from there on in. Whereas this one, you get to keep all your stuff. So you're going to get a good swing in, but then you're probably going to get a second good swing because all of your stuff is flying.
Also, unfortunately, this is a non-bow with Odric. I mean, it gives your things flying, but if you have both on the battlefield during combat, if everything dies, then they all have flying when they die. So, whoops.
Right.
But that's just a quirky little interaction.
Right.
All right. What's your first card?
Well, if you're going to give us the Luminous Brood Moth, then the least I can do is follow it up with a card that can work with the Luminous Brood Moth. I'm going to go with the Ozolith right off the bat.
Ooh.
So the Ozolith is a legendary artifact, and it only costs 1 mana. Right on. You're almost at the point now, without me saying anything about the card, that this is going to be worth it in your deck, just as a 1 mana artifact that does nothing. However, the Ozolith, it says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. So if you've got if the Brood Moth is out there giving flying tokens to creatures, if one of those creatures with a flying token on it dies, that token gets moved onto the Ozolith, which you can then gift onto another creature. And it doesn't even have to be yours, it can be somebody else's. Now, I talked about the flying token because of the Brood Moth. Practically speaking, this is going to be all about the +1/+1 counters. Those are the most obvious, the primary ones, and it's just they're going to be coming in fast and furious because that's the kind of deck you're going to be running.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting card, and I wish that as glad as I am that it has legendary. I mean, not that I think you can really do many broken things with it. In regards to having multiple, but because it is a legendary plane specific artifact, it's gonna be a while before we get another printing of it, which is a shame, unless it comes out in any master set or something. But it really needs that reprint, because I love this card to death, and I wish I could put it in 4 or 5 of my decks, but it's $18.
Yeah. Oh, this one is
at
not,
the least.
Yeah, this one is not cheap. Now, Andy, I know you have it in one of your decks, right?
Yeah, I only have one of them.
All right. So, how has it played for you?
Depends if my opponents have answers.
Sure.
If they don't have an answer for it, it goes beautifully. It either incentivizes them to try to find artifact removal, or it disincentivizes them to kill my things because they know that I'm just going to be moving those counters around.
Right. When this card first came out, I love myself a +1/+1 counter and could picture it in at least a couple of decks. So I immediately went out and got 4 of them. So now they're in a series of decks. And like you say, a lot of times nothing really happens because if you have that creature that has 6 +1/+1 counters on it, your opponents are trying to find other ways to get rid of it rather than just simply killing it and knowing that those 6 counters are immediately going to be going on to another creature as soon as I can do it. Right. But there are other times when this thing has just worked out very well for me.
Especially with like the Ikoria ability counters. Like this isn't just +1 counters, which is great. Obviously with Broodmoth it's kind of weird, but because generally you're gonna get like 6 flying counters on it, and then you put them all on one creature, which is whatever. But like there are things that care about how many counters in general you have. But I mean, obviously this is more for your +1/+1 counters, because there are gonna be so many of them. Right. Oh, I can just imagine what this is like in Buzzbark. Oh, hi Frankie.
Yes. Well, this is in Buzzbark. I have yet to have a spot where we hit mass removal, and then we
Frankie,
and then
hi.
all the tokens came up. Hey Frankie. You mentioned the idea that there, something you really do need to keep in mind, that it is on target creature and it is all of the tokens. So you can't just pick some
counters,
or all of the counters. So you can't just pick some. You have to pick. They all go onto the one creature. So it's not perfect in every way. And I will say, it is kind of a shame that it's legendary. I did have a 60 card deck in mind, which was going to essentially have a creature that, one of the artifact creatures that is relatively cheap and comes in with a couple of +1/+1 counters.
Oh yeah.
And if you sacrifice it, well, then those 2 counters go on the Ozolith. But if the Ozolith wasn't legendary, I could have 2 copies of it out at once, and then they would each get 2 copies of +1/+1 counters. And then when it comes back out, it has 2 +1/+1 counters because I'm recurring it. And then I would take those 4 counters and add it on to the creature. Then I've got 6, and then sack it again, and things get really stupid after that. But
yeah, I mean, even with like any persist,
Oh yeah.
They come back on their own because they'll have the +1s on them instead of -1s, and then they come back. You wait until combat. You put them all on that creature, and then you can sack it at will. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Speaking of artifact removal, my next card's Gem Razor for 3 and a green, 4/4 beast. It has mutate for green 1. It says if you cast the spell for its mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate into the creature on top, plus all abilities from under it. It natively has reach and trample, and whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. So the way I see this is that it is generally going to be a better Thrashing Brontodon. So Thrashing Brontodon is a very similar creature. I think it's a 2/3 instead, for 1 green. And then for 1 and sack it, you can destroy target artifact or enchantment. This comes in probably as a 4/4, unless you put it underneath other creature.
Right.
You can put it underneath, say, I don't know, a 6/6. So then it's a 6/6 with reach and trample, and then because you mutated it, it destroys the thing you need to destroy.
Right.
Which is fantastic.
It destroys the
and
Ozolith.
On top of it, it still has reach and trample.
Right.
Which is exactly, it's so good. Giving anything trample, really good. Giving anything reach, really good. And the fact that, comparatively to Thrashing Brontodon, it has very little downside. The only downside it really has is the fact that you have to mutate it onto a non-human.
Right. And that's just mutate.
And there are a lot of cards out there that, there have been plenty of times that I look at a card, I'm like, wow, I'm surprised this does not have the human subtype.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Right.
It looks like a human, but it's not definitely a human.
Right, and I think that I like this, and even if you're only getting a chance to, even if you only mutate the creature that one time, and you're only getting the ability to destroy an artifact or enchantment once, I still think that this is still think this is a cool card and a great, a great way to go.
Yeah. And for 20 cents, it's worth it. Like, it's just so... Like, it's a 4/4 for 4 that has reach and trample at worst.
Right.
And honestly, a cool thing about it, and I don't know where this would come in handy, I guess, except unless somebody steals something of yours. This says mutate it onto a creature you own. So if somebody steals a creature of yours, you can still mutate onto it. I don't know where that would come in handy, but it could be helpful.
Yeah.
If it's like the only target.
And I should also mention, Anguirus, Armored Killer, is also Gem Raiser. As part of, it's one of the alternate arts that had when they had the famous.
And then same with Broodmoth is Mothra Supersonic Queen.
Perfect. So
the Godzilla alts. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
I think we got time for one more before break.
All right. So instead of one more, I'm going to squeeze 5 more. Well, I'm going to squeeze a whole bunch more in because I'm going to do a series.
What the heck, Bruce?
Haha. The Triomes. For those who aren't aware, the Triomes are essentially, they're a land that have three of the basic land types on the cards. So if you are searching for a forest, you can find, say, for example, the Ketria Triome, because forest is one of the land types that are listed there. So it has 3 different basic land types. It taps for, obviously, for those 3. It taps for one of those 3 colors. And it also has cycling 3, so you can discard the card, or you pay 3 mana, discard the card, and draw a card. So if you are getting close to the end of the game, you can cycle it away and dig a little deeper. The only real downside to the card is that they come into the battlefield tapped. So,
which, I mean, is, I feel like, made up for with the cycling. I mean, it really shows you how to use it, because if, toward the end of the game, you don't need a land that comes in tapped, you'd cycle it away for 3, hopefully get a card that you can use a little faster than the land that you can use next turn. But, yeah, I mean, these cards are sick as hell. And it's I love the alt art, and I wish that we could get similar alt art for the 5 from New Capenna.
Yeah.
But I mean, I get it. I get that they're drastically different on drastically different planes.
Now, for those of you who are using what were they called? There was a prior set of lands that also tapped for one of 3 colors. However, they required you to return another land to your hand. They're the lair lands. They required you to return a non-lair back to your hand, and you weren't tapping for 2 mana, so you were just getting shorted on a land. They also didn't have cycling. They also didn't list a basic land type. So while the lairs were good in their day, these cards are just significantly better. Hey, if you want to run both, go ahead. But if you're looking to if you're just running the lairs, then you should probably switch and start running the appropriate Triome to replace that lair. So
these are slightly out of my price range to get playsets of each, but I mean, they are definitely worth it. They're fetchable, in the very least, like you were saying.
Yeah.
They're pretty.
They are.
They don't have easy to remember names, though.
No. What is the? I think the range is somewhere between 10 and 20, isn't it, for these? I could be wrong.
The cheapest is, I think, $9 for the white, black, green one in Dotha Triome.
Okay.
It's like $9.40 or something, and the most is
Yeah, right now there's just the for the Triome.
I think it's the
there's just the 5.
The Teamer one is higher than $16.
Yeah, it's
the green, blue, red one, Ketria.
Yeah, so. Zagoth, Savai, Raugrin, Ketria, and Indatha were the 5 that were released in the Ikoria set. And yeah, I think they're great cards. Like I said, I know the price tag's a little high, but I'm always big on making sure your mana base is good. These are cards that are going to show up in your decks over and over again.
Yeah, let's throw it over to break before
Sounds good.
I've got a few cards from C20 that I want to talk about.
Yep.
I know you have a couple more you want to talk about.
You bet.
So we'll talk about those when we get back. But for now, take some sip of water. We're gonna have a nice, cool, refreshing ad break, and we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of Falspot is brought to you by The Song of Creation! The Song of Creation! It's there for you when you need to draw cards, but beware, you're gonna discard your hand at the end of turn. Also, be careful not to mill yourself out. I know I have many a time with this card. But for when you're feeling down and you just want to draw some cards, turn to The Song of Creation! And now back to you. Hey, welcome back. It's the Song of Creation Variety Hour. We're talking about cards from Ikoria, because it's a set that many of us missed, if only because we were stuck at home. We were talking about cards from the main set, and now we're going to transition a little bit into C20, which was the Ikoria Commander set. Commander 2020, great set. 5 decks, very cool. Had some cards that I feel like belong in not only more decks, but honestly, I feel like we're going to come back around on as possible, as they call, staples. So, we're talking during break, and we had one last one from the Ikoria main set. Bruce, you brought to the table a reconnaissance mission.
Right. An enchantment. It's 2 and blue. And it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. It also has cycling 2, so if you're looking to just get that card draw immediately, you can always use cycling 2. This is another one of these cards. Like I mean, take your pick. It just fits.
Yeah, you're gonna draw a card.
Right.
It's either Coastal Piracy or you draw a card for 2, because you don't have the thing you need.
Right.
I like that with the lands, you cycle toward the end of the game. With this, you're going to probably cycle toward the beginning of the game, if only because you're like, I don't have the mana yet, type of thing.
Right. The only downside to me for this card is that it costs 2 blue, and blue is the color that's least likely to run creatures. However, if you're running a blue deck that doesn't have a lot of creatures, then you're not running Reconnaissance Mission. If you're running a blue deck that happens to be working, I don't know, with white and is loaded down with small birds, or is working with, well, every other color, you're going to get a lot of creatures, and those creatures are eventually going to do damage, whether they've got some kind of evasion. I mean,
it shows on the picture. This is a flying creature. Like, that gives you a very clear hint of, like, hey, this works well with flyers. And then obviously you've got things that work well around that, even in blue. I mean, honestly, like you said, blue isn't huge on creatures, but this set was for multicolored decks.
right.
Even if it's just two colors.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes sense to me. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? So,
yeah. I find it interesting considering the flavor text is by Jarina Kudrow, who heads the human. It's the black, white, red commander deck. It's human based, and this is a blue card. Anyway.
Yeah.
But speaking of commanders, my next card is actually in each of the commander decks for Ikoria, because a colorless, I guess you could call it a mana rock. I mean, quite literally. It's 3 mana for an artifact called Manascape Refractor. Manascape Refractor enters the battlefield tapped. Oh, that's unfortunate. But it also has all activated abilities of all lands on the battlefield, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to pay the activation costs on Manascape Refractor's abilities. So, in the very least, it is just another one of your lands.
Well, I mean,
and
worst case is that it's a it's a 3 mana rock that comes into play tapped. That's kind of brutal.
Best case scenario, it's a Gaia's Cradle, it's a Maze of Ith,
right.
It's a Commander Beacon, it's there's so many lands out there that you want to have the abilities of, that maybe your deck's not playing that color, or you've got things like Alchemist Refuge, or what's the green-red one that gives things trample? Kessig Wolfrun.
Thank you. You Strip Mine, Maze of Ith. You can go old school, like you said, Gaia's Cradle. Any of the lands that flip to be, that turn, or any of the cards that flip that become lands. This is getting all of those activated abilities.
I'm sure that because this is an artifact, there are too many ways to break it. But it's just a fun little 3 mana rock that if you have a playgroup anything like ours, I think it definitely is worth the 50 cents.
Well, yes. I mean, if your playgroup is a lot more cutthroat, is looking at turn 5, turn 6 kills, this isn't going to do a lot, because it's going to come in on turn 2 or 3, depending on how well you've ramped, at the earliest. And it's going to come into play tapped. So you're not going to get to use it until turn 3 or 4 at best. And then you're going to get 1, maybe 2 activations out of it. And that's just not enough if you're looking for it to tap for mana. But to be fair, most of the time, I'm not looking... I don't think this is the kind of card that you're looking for and saying, oh, good, now I can tap for any color I need. I mean...
Yeah.
Yes, that's there, but with our group, there are plenty of people playing all kinds of lands that do all kinds of things, and I'm probably the worst culprit of the bunch. But I would hazard a guess and say that most groups have that sort of thing at their table. I can really see Manascape Refractor being an all-star in, well, not so much Gonti, but in a lot of the decks where you're stealing other people's cards, because you're getting mana of any color. So you can use it to activate that way, and I think that's a significant benefit. And obviously, I think if you're looking at it just for mana purposes, then the more colors you've got in your commander, the better this card's going to be.
It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah.
Your next one.
My next one. Netherborn Altar.
Love that card.
This is a black artifact. Costs 1 and a black. Its ability, you tap and put a soul counter on Netherborn Altar, which means that the soul counter is part of the activation cost. So even if the rest of it is stuffed, you're still adding the soul counter to the card. So put the soul counter on Netherborn Altar. And then for that you get, put your commander into your hand from the command zone. Then you lose 3 life for each soul counter on Netherborn Altar. So what the altar is an alternate way to pay the commander tax. So instead of having to pay 2 more mana, you're going to pay 3 life each time you would have paid 2 more mana.
Yeah. And honestly, if you want, you can do this the first time you play your commander. I don't know why you would. But
I can see this working really well in any sort of a deck that's looking to have you sacrifice your commander early. There are a lot of the newer, smaller commanders where you can see somebody, where you can see yourself using it. Well, I mean, this would go wonderfully in, say, a squee or something like that. Well, not squeeze so much. But anyways, in a bunch of the smaller commanders where you're looking to sacrifice them on a regular basis. Because the first time around, sure, you pay 2 extra mana, you can put it back out. The next time around, you pay 3 life, and you bring it back, and you put it in your hand, and then you pay the regular cost. The next time around, you tap the altar again. This time you're paying 6 life to get it out. It's
right.
People forget that when you take a cost that is mana and remove the mana and replace it with life, it skews everything. I mean, you're only paying 3 life out of 40 here. And this is for what is arguably the linchpin in your deck. And you're saving at least 2, you're saving 2 mana, say.
And you're getting more and more creatures and artifacts and whatnot in black that have lifelink. So, I mean, it's fairly easy to get this 3 life back without much effort at all.
Right.
Or especially with any sort of like aristocrat type, sub-theme or even theme, like you will be getting that 3 life easy.
Right. And I mentioned the cheaper creatures, but I mean, there's a lot of 6 mana legendary creatures that I won't run because I know that if it dies, I'm probably never going to be able to cast it again, or never want to, because I'm not going to want to pay 8. Well, the altar says I can do that. I just keep paying 6. Yes, I'll have to pay 3 life and then maybe 6 life to do it again, but that's a small cost. That's a small price to pay for for being able to use a commander that costs 6 and recast it more than once. So, I think that's really something you can take advantage of.
For sure. I love it. I guess this comes to my last card. It is a green creature. It's a 3/3 for 3 and a green. Human druid with flash and hexproof. It's called Slippery Bogbonder. Slippery Bogbonder. When Slippery Bogbonder enters the battlefield, put a hexproof counter on target creature, then move any number of counters from among creatures you control onto that creature. Now, the way this reads to me is obviously protection. It gives the thing hexproof. And it gives the thing hexproof indefinitely. I mean, until it dies. And obviously, if you have the Ozolith out, then great. It'll the hexproof counter will stick around for a while. But it is also flexible in the way that if you don't necessarily need that, and you have it in hand, you can still flash it out to move your other counters around during combat, before blockers, after blockers, before the next, before your untap. It's player 4's turn. They go to end step. You play this out. You move all your counters onto your biggest creature, and then maybe it has trample, and then maybe you kill people with it. It's great.
Ignoring all of the rest of the stuff that is roaring through my brain right now, this is somebody wants to bounce your commander. You pay 4 mana. You put a hexproof token onto your commander. Now they can't target it, and they just tried to, so their spell fizzles. Yeah, and it, and then on top of that, you can get whatever else. Now, if this is Ikoria, so maybe you're also transferring a flying token, maybe you're transferring a trample token, maybe you're whatever. But even if all you're doing is transferring some +1/+1 counters, this thing is amazing. And the idea that you could flash it in, in response to somebody else playing a spell is huge. My first thought when I saw the Bogbonder was, wow, this belongs in every Selesnya deck. Because there are so many white cards that give a +1/+1 counter to all of your creatures in play. or something along that lines. And this then takes all of those creatures, or takes all the counters on all those creatures, funnels it onto one creature, gives it hexproof, and you likely have a way to give it some other kind of evasion so it can just charge through. I see the Slippery Bog Bonder and Cathar's Crusade as best buddies, just absolute best buddies.
Ooh, yeah.
A Crusade passing out a +1/+1 counter to all the creatures every time another creature comes into play, and then boom, all of those counters get shifted onto one creature, and that creature also gets a hexproof counter on top of that. Oh, you just suddenly took a deck that goes wide and gave it that focus so that one creature can just come charging in, and and then you add the Ozolith to that deck, and suddenly if they do manage to somehow get rid of that one creature, well, all those tokens are just sitting on the Ozolith waiting for you to play another. So
yeah, I keep thinking about this card defensively because of course I do. It says hexproof, but I didn't even think about the hi Frankie. I didn't even think about the fact that you can do this after your opponent has declared their blockers, and you can move all of the +1 counters onto the unblocked creature.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazing.
Play it on your on your combat step. That's another great way to go. And nobody's expecting you to do that because they're just thinking the mana is saved for whatever
post-combat.
Post-combat. The other piece that I think can be easily forgotten here is it says move any number of counters from among creatures you control onto the creature that has the hexproof counter. So you don't have to move them all. This isn't an all or nothing scenario like it is with the Ozolith. This is you pick and choose. So if you've got a bunch of creatures and for whatever reason you want all your creatures to stay with at least 3 toughness, you can leave some of the counters behind and just shift all the rest of them onto that one creature. And if you do happen to have multiple creatures with flying tokens, you don't have to take all the flying tokens. Just take it off of one. Just one to move it over there. And now you've got a creature with hexproof token, a flying token, and a bunch of +1/+1 counters, just waiting for the start of your turn so we can fly in and do some serious damage to somebody's face.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm blown away, Bruce.
Yeah, no, this is another card that it's one of these cards that, again, they don't look like they're doing a lot. A lot of the cards that we've talked about on the podcast today aren't like
win the game
drop
cards,
dead, super amazing, oh my god, blow my mind kind of things. But when you play them, when you actually sit down, have the card in hand, see the opportunity to play it and do it, is when you really discover just like, oh my, this is just it's just a really solid good card. And I think that goes for just about all the cards we've talked about today. I think that they work so well, and and they're not particularly splashy. So
I think that a lot of the sets that came out during the height of the pandemic end up having a lot of these cards that get overlooked, similarly to Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, if only because so many people are looking for I pay 6 and I get to win the game type cards, but these cards are like good at playing the game, and I think that some of the cards that I chose, some of the cards you chose, are going to have this longevity past the next couple sets, even the next couple years.
Right.
And I'm excited to kind of sit down and go through these sets one by one, or 2 by 2 in this case, where we do get to see some of these cards that aren't necessarily, like, I don't think most of these cards are necessarily under the radar, but I do think that, like, when given the opportunity, people are looking elsewhere because they're not thinking of Ikoria as, a commander set, or they're not thinking of it being, like, ultra powerful beyond these legendary creatures that got fame out of being companions or, whatever. So I'm excited to see what else we bring up in the next couple of these types of episodes.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one. It's very easy when these sets come and go to sort of scroll through, look at all the legendary creatures and say, ooh, I want to build around that. And then it's equally as easy to just let some of these cards slide by. And, we never even touched on dire tactics or barrier breach, migration path, which is, simply just straight up, strictly better than explosive vegetation, which I appreciate is maybe not the best way to search for your basics, but migration path is just straight up better. And there's a bunch of these cards in all of these sets. So I encourage everybody to go back through these, back through some of the recent sets that maybe you weren't completely dialed in for, and just sort of take a look.
Yeah, I think that's gonna do it for us tonight. But we'll be back next week with a cool deck tale about a deck that I've been working on.
Yes.
That I've played a few times. So come back for that. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Oh, that was my stool being knocked over. We'll see you next week. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great night. I'm going to go feed my cat, maybe play some Magic. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the Temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!